football faces Michigan State in East Lansing Saturday, November 30th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, airing live on FS1. The Scarlet Knights will be limping into this game figuratively, literally, and mentally after a devastating loss to Illinois, coming in 6-5, multiple injuries. Obviously, prior to that Illinois game and during that Illinois game, won't know for sure until that availability report is out before kickoff on Saturday. But here to help preview the action, David Anderson, as always, thanks so much for being back. Wanted to get your thoughts on this matchup. Rutgers 6-5, Michigan State bowl eligibility at 5-6.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been litigated throughout the community that it's going to take a lot for Rutgers to find something to play for in this game. Obviously, based on their record, Rutgers only one game better in the standings. Michigan State has also played 3 of the Big 4 in the Big Ten this year, plus Michigan. So they've played Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana. They have not played Penn State, but they have played Michigan, their in-state rival. So they have played a very close to traditional Big Ten East schedule in the sense of the level of competition. That said, they have also lost a game to Boston College, and they played a very tight season opener against a group of 5 teams. So this team is a little bit all over the place. I guess, again, the main takeaway is just Rutgers has to find something to play for. My hope is that there are some guys who are just not going to play in the bowl game, and they treat this as their last career game. That is my hope. The other thing is you just got to hope some of the guys have levels of pride that, back before the bowl playoff or even bowl games were a thing when players just played for pride, for fun, like most of us did many of our years playing football and other sports, that you just find it inside you to play. Because if you don't, Michigan State has enough talent to beat you. And if you want to talk about their players, I guess let's start with their offense. Their quarterback, Aiden Childs, I guess let's just start with why he's not Gavin Wimsatt. Well, first of all, he's completing about 60% of his passes, which is nothing Wimsatt ever came close to. He reminds me a lot more of Ja'Cory Brown, who Rutgers faced in the bowl game last year at Miami. He's tall, slender. He's not a tank like Wimsatt or even a Johnny Shepard. And he kind of slides through pressure. Like when he gets a lot of pressure, he knows he can kind of step up, step back. He has pretty good pocket presence for a young fellow. And then he also knows how to then use that to get outside or run. And so he's a little bit slippery in the backfield, which makes him a little tougher to tackle than either Wimsatt or some of the other guys that we've seen. And again, completing 60% of his passes for an athlete like that is something that they're going to have a little bit of trouble defending. We know they have 2 good running backs, or at least Big Ten level rotational running backs, in Carter, who did a good job against Rutgers last year, as well as Kayron Lynch-Adams, our old friend, who we know was one of the best recruits in his recruiting class when he went to Rutgers, went to UMass. Now he's at Michigan State. And then wide receivers, they have Nick Marsh, who I know no one wants to hear this, but he's basically a Pat Bryant in training, 6'3", thin, but he plays with a really good acceleration for a guy of his height. And obviously it's not what we want to hear after last week. They have another receiver who's had a nice Foster's a nice possession receiver, and then they have a tight end who's pretty good too, Jack Veiling. So, I mean, on offense, they have some pieces. The weakness is definitely their line. As you expect with a new coaching staff, they lost 4 offensive line starters from last year. So that's really where you're going to have to attack them, especially if you can attack them right up the gut. They had a lot of trouble with Illinois 2 weeks ago in that regard. That's really where Rutgers is going to have to butter their bread this week. They got to pressure him up the middle, but then if he does get outside, don't allow a 30-yard touchdown run like we saw last week. So that's really where hopefully Rutgers can take some things from the film last week. I know they did stop Illinois on that QB run to the right on that final drive that actually set up the 4th and 13, basically. It might have been 2nd down, but hopefully they can learn something on the film. A lot of new guys playing in the backfield. But Michigan State has an okay offense that can make some big plays, but also is susceptible to you just, destroying their offensive line and not allowing them to get anything if you come in fired up.
All right, so I wanted a great overview as always. I wanted to ask you, as a player, going into this type of situation, how key is Schiano and the staff's handling of the aftermath of this loss to Illinois? We know Schiano wasn't saying much publicly, had a chance to kind of go into Pat Lanny, asking him a great question in Monday's presser about, has he had any self-reflection on his decision-making? Said they've all moved on. He's not addressing that, right? I mean, it's easy to say that, but emotionally, mentally, this is a loss that stings for many reasons, which I've gone into and we've talked about. But just in terms of the mentality of the players going into this game, you talked about having something to play for. We know that they're very banged up. We know they're bowl eligible, but is this win going to really change things? Obviously, it's a chance to have a first winning season in a decade. That matters to the seniors for sure. But how much is, we don't know what Schiano is saying behind the scenes, but how critical is that handling in terms of getting this team ready to bounce back and get off the mat? They've done it a few times this year, but this seems like the most challenging bounce back opportunity yet.
I would say I'm more concerned about Rutgers losing last week's game twice than probably any time maybe since the Graber era of a game. That's how emotionally demoralizing that game was. And now you hear about the aftermath of, additional injuries, things like that. It's very concerning to me. It's possible that your coach is saying something different publicly than they're saying privately. Now that's possible. There's a lot of things that go into it. There's also angles of like, I guess I never had a coach in any of the sports I played, soccer, basketball, baseball, even playing, a little ice hockey, football. Like, I don't think I ever had a coach that said something or did something after a loss of this magnitude that surprised us as a team. Like, by that, you spend so much time with your coaches that you have a pretty good idea how they're going to react to certain things like that. So, but I don't know because I'm not in the room, like what he's saying to them in there. Now we've seen Greg Schiano get this team off the mat earlier this year, other times in his tenure. We look at last year, we look at the year before. There's other times that it's happened. So I don't know what is being said. However, I do think it's on the coaching staff to come up with little ways or motivational tactics, not just big picture, but smaller picture. Like, for example, Michigan State's defensive backfield's completely depleted. Let's just try to throw all over them. It adds a different wrinkle than like, hey, we're just going to go in there and try to run it on them. Like, I don't think that the team's going to have that level of emotion to just go in there and try to steamroll them. But if you do have some players with that mentality, and unfortunately, I'd say the number one guy is probably Brian Felter, who's out for the season, that like he would pull a Larry Bird and be like, or Michael Jordan and say like, I'm taking my aggression out on these guys. Like, I know they're not wearing an Illinois on their jersey or their helmet, but I'm going to take it out on them. Like my frustration. If you have guys like that, then maybe you can just try to steamroll them. But that's also on the coaching staff to know what kind of team do you have. I would say it's more likely, especially in the modern age, that's going to be like, hey, why don't we just go wide open for receivers? I know the weather, it's late season, but like they're missing their entire defensive backfield. It might motivate your team to just see things in a different way, turn the page a little bit, to go in with a different game plan approach. And on defense, I'm not sure what else they can do. They basically tried everything in that second half last week and nothing worked. So I do think it depends on the players you have. I don't know what the coaching staff's saying behind the scenes, but this is where a good coaching staff can figure out like what's going to motivate this team. Do I have to play more younger guys? Do I have to play more seniors? Who's going to be the guy that comes with some fire in this game? And that's where, we'll find out on Saturday.
Great points. I think obviously I do think that's a strength of Schiano's in terms of the culture of the team, getting them to play together and for each other. Obviously, I think how he's handled this internally is going to be telling in terms of how they respond, in terms of taking his own accountability for his decision making. I think that's critical. I thought it was curious to bring up special teams play as a negative in that loss to Illinois. He kind of did that unprompted when asked about the offense making progression. So that was interesting for sure. But overall, I think, in terms of there's probably going to be a lot of younger players that have to play in this game. I think keeping things simple as possible, is important. I mean, Jordan Chiles, he's very up and down this year. He's been inconsistent. The weather is going to be in the 20s. That's the forecast as of now. So it's going to be, I like the idea of opening things up offensively. They're going to have to score points to win this game, no matter what. So I think trying to get a lead by throwing the ball, if obviously using Monungai is critical, but I think establishing a lead on the road, I think if this team falls behind a couple scores, it's going to be really tough mentally for them to bounce back. And it is up to the senior leaders that are going to be on that field. And you obviously feel for them the most in that loss last week. But I think that is a strength of Shiano in terms of getting this team to bounce back. But this is, I think, another level in terms of having to do that. But also because the turnaround is so short. It's not like they have a few weeks to prepare, like their next bowl game and all that.
Right.
Just in terms of, I guess, defensively, we know that they're depleted. I guess what would your approach be, or you think that Harris Semiak's approach might be, just in terms of going into this game, A, because of how Michigan State operates, and B, in terms of the potential, lack of experience on personnel that he'll probably be faced with?
This is kind of an odd, very specific tactical thing, but Aiden Childs is very mobile. He's a right-handed quarterback. He, like we saw with Wimsett last year, or even the year before, really, when he first started playing, it's harder for them to develop chemistry with a lot of different receivers. So that's why you see their Michigan State is very top-heavy. They have two receivers that make a lot of catches and a tight end. So they have three guys, more or less, right? So what I would probably try to do is I would probably try to bring pressure, not from his blind side, but from his strong side, to try to flush him out to his left. And by doing that, you shrink the field, right? Because one thing we talk about when we were talking about, like, do you roll Wimsett or do you roll Athan out as an offense, is you can, but then you kind of limit the number of receivers and routes that they can throw. They're only throwing to half the field. Defense only has to cover half the field. So that might be an area where I think it might make sense to kind of pressure him a lot from that side, whether it's corner blitzes, because one of the things a cornerback can do, obviously I trust the senior to blitz more than a younger player, but it's an easier assignment for them to execute if you're just like, hey, run a corner blitz. Like, as soon as he snapped the ball, run. Obviously I wish Eric Rogers, who sounds like he's definitely not going to play, is a good blitzer, right? Max Melton was a great blitzer. Even Longerbeam is a pretty good blitzer himself. So I think that bringing some of those types of exotic pressures is really where he's going to struggle. And if you give up a big play, so be it. But also by bringing those pressures, he might not be able to get it to the receivers that he has chemistry with. And that's where I think you want to force him to have to make quick decisions. And sometimes it's going to work out and sometimes it's not. But I do think, kind of like I was saying with the Rutgers offense just a second ago, you got to come into this game saying with a different angle, a different wrinkle to get your team fired up. If you just kind of go in there and say, yeah, we're going to do it, like, that might work if you're Alabama. And even then, it hasn't worked this year for Alabama. Like, this era of college football, no. You got to have excitement. You got to come in with an angle, a tactic, some little advantages. And that would just be, for example, one thing I would do. Because if you let him sit back there in the pocket, he's only either going to throw it to a guy who's open or he's going to take off and run. And we know that Rutgers does not have the personnel. And the combination of personnel, eye discipline, all that stuff to stop a quarterback who's just going to be trying to run free on a cold day.
I think a big part of that in terms of defensively is Rutgers just being physical in this game. Obviously, being dealing with some injuries, the cold weather. Obviously, tackling's been an issue on and off all season. How tough can they be, and how willingly can they be physical from a physical standpoint is obviously key. On the flip side, Ethan Kaliakmanis, I tweeted before he even had that last run and touchdown pass to Monungai. Win or lose in that game, he was proving to be a warrior yet again. Just his play over the last month has been, I think, inspiring as a Rutgers fan to see. Just in terms of he hasn't been perfect, he hasn't been the most accurate, but he has made some big time plays for this team when they've needed it most, and especially on that drive to give them the lead late. What are your just impressions of him and how he's continued to kind of evolve as this season's gone on?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be impressed when he's got wide receivers in and out of the lineup. They have, was it you who had said they lead the Big Ten in drop yardage, basically the amount of yards that they would have had they not dropped a pass, and that doesn't even count yards after the catch. That just counts,
right?
Where you are on the field when you drop the ball. Now, obviously, they've thrown the ball more than some other Big Ten teams for the first time, seemingly ever. But you got to be impressed by. They put KJ Duff in the lineup. He throws the ball to him. They go through 4 or 5 tight ends. He throws the ball to Mike Higgins. Like, he has not discriminated as much as perhaps he even should have in terms of who he's throwing the ball to at times. Because obviously, you texted me during the Illinois game that Ian Strong, I mean, there's times when he's in effect unstoppable. And so, if Dymere Miller would just not, it's not necessarily like pure drops, like concentration drops for Miller, but there's some of those passes that, same thing we've seen with Chris Long, where it's like kind of in his hands. There's kind of a defender in the area. Maybe he has to reach a little bit. I mean, Dymere Miller is his biggest disappointment for me this year is he just doesn't have a very large catch radius. Like, he's not catching balls out here. Like, if the ball's not here, I don't have that much confidence in him catching it. And part of that's because they kind of run him ragged sometimes. Like in that USC game, he was like out of gas, for example.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Michigan State, they're missing 4 of their 5 preseason projected defensive backs due to injury. 4 of 5. And 2 of the key backups. So of their entire 2 deep, they're missing more than half of them. So it's going to be a cold day. But this is a type of game where just if you can complete passes and the wind's not insane, like, it's going to be a huge, huge advantage. Especially because Michigan State, like we talked about last year, their linebackers are susceptible in pass coverage. My old friend Cal Halliday still keeps on keeping on. But it's not just him. They also have Matthews and they have Jordan Hall too, and then Turner. So they're basically the heartbeat of their defense is their 3 linebackers who rotate, and those guys are going to be playing for pride. Like, do you think they're not going to be playing their butts off for bowl eligibility after a tough up and down season for Michigan State? Like, these guys are going to be running around like wild men if you just run the ball up the middle. Now, I know Kyle Monungai is a talented back. Maybe he's going to come in there with some extra effort because he's already told them behind closed doors, hey, I'm not going to play the bowl game because, I mean, he has nothing else to prove, right? He might,
which we don't know.
He won't. He's a warrior. This guy, he's not going to want to sit out, right? But I could also see a scenario where Schiano tells him to tell the team, this is my last game, even though he's lying, so that they are like motivated, because those are the little tricks that Schiano, to his credit, does do well in the pregame. When we talk about his preparation, program building, things like that. But, I mean, the strength of the Michigan State defense is without a doubt their linebacking core. They have injuries in the defensive backfield. And, of course, if you look at returning defensive line starters from last year, I know we're at the end of the year, but they have 0 guys come back from last year. So they clearly don't have depth on the defensive line. And so, yeah, you might be able to run at the defensive line, but their linebackers are going to come flying down unless they are going to respect the pass. And so you're going to have to pass the ball in this game, or just go 7 linemen, just, 2 extra linemen, put a tight end, a fullback as a lineman, and just try to plow them like on every play. Like that, those are pretty much your choices in this game, because if you don't act aggressive, you're not going to win. Like, this team is too beat up mentally, physically to go in and just try to just go through the motions and win this game. And Ethan Kaliakmanis is a gamer. He, like you said, he's proven he's a warrior. So if you tell him, hey, I know you fumbled last week, but we need you to run again, or you're going to take a few hits, but we need you to step back in the pocket, and throw 4 wide, like, he'll do it. He has proven he will do what it takes to win. And so I know it's a long-winded way of getting back to your original question about Ethan, but if you have a quarterback who can carry your team, it can make up for a lot of talent deficiencies, personnel deficiencies, and even emotional deficiencies. So this will be the biggest test of Ethan in that regard so far this year.
Yeah, great point. And I think this could almost serve as a proverbial torch passing, right, from Monangai to Kaliakmanis in terms of taking the mantle for this offense and for this team for next season, because his ability to change the game now is evident, and he really did will this team to that late lead, despite having that fumble early in the game. I mean, his running, we've been kind of pro on his running all the whole time, but you really saw it against Illinois how effective he could be despite that fumble that did kind of get the Illini back in the game. His willingness to still do it after the fact and be effective while doing it, I think, was really key to that comeback. Of course, he almost had that interception, but his ability to bounce back, and let that last play be the last play and mentally move forward, I think has been really essential to his success, and something that hopefully the team can take on from an identity standpoint, especially after last week. Any other keys to this game that jump out to you?
I mean, can Nathan learn how to slide in 1 week? I mean, that I get on that 4th down, for example, that he converted right before they scored the touchdown to get the lead. Sure, don't slide on that. It's 4th and 10. You got was it 4th and 10? I think it was 4th and 10. You got to go for it. But his fumble happened 1st and 10 on the edge of field goal range. That's not a time to try to break a tackle, juke a man. Yeah. I mean, that's a time to slide. Now, sure, there are times to not slide, especially from an emotional standpoint, not just, hey, it's 4th and 10, you can't go down. But, I mean, that would have been the time, like, please just slide. Please just slide for me.
All right, in closing here, anything special teams-wise you see in this matchup and any other X factors for this game?
Well, Michigan State has a proven kicker and a proven punter, Kim and Eckley. So, and that after last year's debacle, their special teams meetings this week are just going to be rewatching the lowlights as motivation from last year's debacle on kickoff, on punt, and everything like that. So I do think they're going to come ready to go on special teams. And then the last thing I just wanted to say, the coaching staff at Michigan State, I really have a lot of respect for Jonathan Smith coming from Oregon State. He was a great player there. He took them to heights they had never seen as a player. Successful coach. I think that the only limitation they have right now and the big question mark is just, will they get linemen on both sides of the ball? I think they'll have passing game. I think they'll have skill position guys. Michigan State has plenty of tradition. I know they've struggled a little bit other than the one Miracle Mel year since D'Antonio's departure. But, there are the ingredients in place in Michigan, in East Lansing, for this to be a successful team. One thing I do think won't last long, the defensive coordinator, old friend Joe Rossi, who when we talked preseason, I said my number one reason why I thought Rutgers was going to win this game was preseason was because Joe Rossi was their DC. Obviously, familiarity with Kirk Shiraka, familiarity with Shiano. I just feel like Rossi comes into a game a little bit fired up, and if his team's whatever the game plan is not working, they sometimes struggle to adjust. And so, especially down defensive linemen, especially with a completely discombobulated. I mean, if you think the Rutgers defensive backfield's banged up, the Michigan State is possibly worse, if you can believe it. Like I said earlier, I mean, their preseason starters, 4 of the 5 are out. Even if Spencer plays, he's been hurt for weeks on end. And so, he's going to try to just have their linebackers win this game, and Rutgers just don't let them do it. You got to take advantage of the defensive line, take advantage of their secondary. I know it's going to be cold, but one other thing about being a player, there's nothing more demoralizing in any sport that's cold outside, baseball, football, soccer, anything like that, where you come into the game thinking, well, these cold conditions mean they won't pass the ball, or, runs are going to be at a premium in a baseball game when it's freezing, and guys are just hitting bombs, like, even though their hands are shattering from how cold it is. Nothing's more deflating than that. So if Rutgers can get some points early, I don't think Michigan State will pack it in, but I do think that they're a pretty emotional team as judged by their swings of the past 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago against Illinois started sleepwalking and Michigan State took it to them. And then last week, vice versa, once Michigan State started sleepwalking, Purdue mounted a comeback, cut it to a 7-point game, and then ultimately Michigan State had to win it in the end. So I do think that, this is an odd game. It's a 1.5-point spread as we're recording this early in the week, so that could change in favor of Michigan State. But every prognosticating computer source says Rutgers is like a 52 to 58, 59% chance of winning. So what does that tell you? That means Vegas has little confidence that this is about what these teams have shown so far this season, and it's more about what emotion they bring to this game.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think just because of the state of both defenses, this probably is going to be a back and forth battle, high scoring affair, which will probably come down to the end. And I think, which team can stay focused down the stretch in that fourth quarter, which coaching staff can outthink the other, all keys, obviously. And it would be great for this senior class and for this program to take a step forward, win that 7th game, get that first regular season winning record in 10 years, get the most Big Ten regular season wins ever. Still check some boxes that were left open after last week's debacle, but won't take away. Well, I guess you could argue. I don't know. For me, it wouldn't. But I think still you have a chance to show progress, right? And if you win this game, then you go to a bowl game with a chance to get 8 wins. That certainly is nothing to sneeze at in the context of this season and all the adversity it had. So I just
let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
Okay. So we all know Schiano did. Very few coaches could have got their team off the mat after a 4-game losing streak like he did, right? That's fine. We can criticize his faults in game coaching, whatever. That's fine. But is there any coach that you feel has a better chance to motivate their team in a game like this than Greg Schiano in the Big Ten? Like, nothing to play for other than pride and some statistical stuff that these players won't see the beginning or the end of. I mean, is there any coach who would have more confidence in motivating their team going into this game?
In terms of current Big Ten coaches or anyone?
Sure. Let's say recent Big Ten coaches, including the current ones.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, probably Urban Meyer, although he never would be in that situation simply because, Ohio State would never have to deal with that type of adversity. I think Harbaugh is really good at that kind of stuff. But again, these are blue blood coaches, blue blood programs. Schiano certainly has the most experience in terms of being in the mud, fighting for life in a season where you've gone through so much. So no, I mean, listen, this certainly is in his wheelhouse, his toolbox of, we've seen him being able to lift this program up many times before. I personally think how he has handled this internally, which we don't know how, but how he has approached it will be telling whether this team responds or not, right? If he exudes a certain, I think, sincerity in terms of how things unfolded, if he did do that, I think it'll resonate with the team, and I think you'll see a good response. I think if he maybe guys that are beat up, guys that are on their way out, if there's any, I don't think Schiano's really ever lost a team before, and I'm not implying that's what's going to happen, but if he handled it, let's say, just the wrong way, whatever that wrong way is, and they lay an egg, I think it's fair to speculate maybe that has something to do with it. So it's going to be fascinating to see, but I agree with you. He is as good as anyone in this situation, and I think that is a strength. However, he's in this situation a lot
for his own doing.
Right. It's self-inflicted. So he's got to get that. That's what we talk about for the offseason. They have to be able to not, shoot themselves in the foot in situations they can make progress. But again, this is a second chance to check some boxes and show progress this season, despite the heartbreak that we've gone through several times this season. So I do have confidence he could do it. I think obviously the health, but I think you're right. I think offensively, strategy-wise, there's a way to inject some life into this team. The defense has. You've seen them respond when the offense has been a spark. You've seen the defense respond in a positive way because it's something that they're not used to. Also, it hasn't been there for many years. So I think you have to lead with the offense in this game, and that's a little bit of a different approach for Schiano too. So can he adapt to that? I think you win by any means necessary, and I think that, it's kind of similar to basketball. If you have to win a shootout, you win a shootout, and I think that's probably Rutgers' best strategy to win this game.
Yeah, the one thing I will say was that the worst way to handle it would have been just throw Harrison Miak under the bus and be like, he called that 4th down all blitz. I had no input on it, and basically Joe alone from or something like that would have been. He didn't say that. He didn't. They took it as like a collective defensive breakdown. I will say that, like, in terms of personnel, scheme, everything. So now, again, could he be blaming Harrison Miak behind closed doors and publicly be saying this when it wasn't? Who knows, right? We don't know whose call that was on the ultimate stage of that play, right? But yeah, I mean, has he handled it the worst possible? No. Has he handled it the best possible publicly? No. So hopefully he's handling it the best possible way with the team and can use that as motivation for them to come out firing. But it's going to be tough, especially in this modern era. Like I said before, these type of games came up all the time back in the 90s, back when there was not as many, playoffs positions and like when guys played for pride, this was much more common scenario, or when there was less bowl games. So we'll see what happens. I mean, how many times has Kirk Ferentz motivated his team to get to their 8th meaningless win in a sense before, so it can be done. So we'll see this weekend. I'm not overly optimistic, but I'm not overly pessimistic. Like, I'm just curious how this team comes out in the first quarter, and I think that'll tell us a lot about what happens over the course of the game.
Yeah, I think we've learned one thing under Schiano and with this team specifically, you can never rule them out, even when you have reasons to do so. So I think that is the biggest reason for hope going into this game, and it obviously would be great for this team and these players to be able to show that resolve in this game against Michigan State, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, FS1. We'll be back with plenty of post-game as well. Thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.